It's good to be with you today. I'd like to begin by introducing our first speaker, Dr. Rossano de Cole, S.J. He was a professor of Christian and Ignatian spirituality at Pontifical Comillas University, Madrid, Spain. He previously taught at the Theological Faculty of Southern Italy, San Luigi Section, Naples, the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, and the Jesuit School of Theology of the Santa Clara University in Berkeley, California. He is the founder of the journal www.ignaziano.org and www.mysterian.it. He participates in several international associations and has several publications, including books and articles. We welcome Dr. Rossano Friz de Cole at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. And I would like to start thanking also the Bernardin Center and especially Professor Gilberto Cavazos-González for the initiative of presenting the proceedings of the conference held in Rome more or less 6 years ago. The reason why the publication of the text was delayed for so long was partly due to the outbreak of the COVID pandemic, but on the other hand, the editor with whom I was already in the third and final editing stage at the end of 2020 left the job, and some time passed until his replacement took over the vacant position. He had to deal with the accumulated work, delaying the publication of the text until the end of 2023. Today, 5 years and a half after the Congress, I think that the relationship between Christian spirituality and spiritual theology is the same as that between citrus and orange. Orange is a particular citrus, so spiritual theology is a particular understanding of Christian spirituality. Today, there's no reason to make difference in the main fundamental points that identify the discipline as the study of the Christian life experience. Of course, language and cultural differences isolate each other. However, as I said during the Congress, language and culture difference should not be taken as a pretext or excuse for not attempting a common and fundamental approach. Another point which is very important is about methodology. The difference could be bridged by a combination of inductive and deductive methods as a result of the comparison between the main presentation by Mary Floric and Jesus Garcia. But now what catches my attention in the evolution of the discipline in relation to contemplative studies is the book recently published this year as the Routledge Handbook of Research Methods in Spirituality and Contemplative Studies, edited by Bernadette Flanagan and Kerry Cloud, shows an important methodological shift opening up a new range of possibility with the methodological options distinguishing between first, second, and third person methods. I believe that this new situation of which we were unaware in 2019 opens up new paths for study and research, also for Christian spirituality. Finally, I would like to take this opportunity to inform you that a group of professors is considering the possibility of organizing an international conference on Christian spirituality for the year 2027. It is still too early to make an unofficial announcement, but the idea is being worked on. The idea behind the conference is to reflect on the current state of the discipline in this first quarter of a century. And as I mentioned with regard to contemplative studies, there are a new stimuli that we need to assimilate in our traditions in order to be able to face the novelties that this new century is bringing for a creative way. And this is what I have think about to say to you to the conference. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rossano. And now we have prior Dr. Gilberto Cavazos-González, OFM, who is Professor of Spirituality and the John Dunn Scotus Endowed Chair of Franciscan Spirituality at the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. He worked as Director of Educational Technology at Pontifical University Antonianum in Rome, as was the papally appointed Secretary of Pontifical Academy of Mary International till 2022. Dr. Gilberto Cavazos-González.
Thank you, everybody. I'm glad to see a number of the authors that are with us this morning, and a number of my students and colleagues here at CTU. In his keynote chapter, my esteemed colleague and co-editor, Rossano Friz de Col, highlights the success of the 2019 Evolving Methodologies Conference. This event facilitated the exchange of knowledge and opinions among scholars in the sister fields of spiritual theology and Christian spirituality studies, promoting methodological debate and contributing to the academic development of methods in these disciplines. In the book's presentation, Diana Villegas advocates for ongoing dialogue between these two academic disciplines. She invites us to integrate historical theology, spirituality studies, and interdisciplinary methods to deepen the understanding and practice of Christian spirituality in today's diverse world. Bernadette Flanagan calls for a shift from studying spirituality as an object to participating spiritually through research itself. By integrating first-person experience, group contemplation, and transformative reading methods, scholars can embody the very spiritual wisdom they seek to understand. My keynote chapter in the book serves as an enlace in the spirit of U.S. Latino theology. I bring together the thoughts of spiritologians and scholars of spiritual theology that I heard speak in the 2019 conference. Lo cotidiano as locus theologicus. In the field of biblical spirituality, Cristo Lombard leans towards a historical critical approach to the biblical text, emphasizing that the revelatory, salvific, and relational acts of God are played out in history. Latina theologian Carmen Nanco Fernandez refers to this as lo cotidiano, which in her words is the source for divine revelation. In my own words, lo cotidiano with all its routines, ups and downs is divine. It is the place where God dwells and acts. Lo cotidiano is the Latino theologian's Sitzenleben. It is what Sybil Travoger calls the ordinary and the trivial as places of possibly encountering God. It takes seriously David Borger's discussion of feelings and emotions as expressed and acted upon. I consider Lo Cotidiano as the spiritual classic of Christian life. However, reflecting on my own spiritual life, I recognize that there are questions, challenges, and global events that often break into mi cotidiano. As such, I admit, Lo Cotidiano Interrupted highlights how unexpected disruptions shape the spiritual life. Self-implication and spirituality studies. Christian spirituality studies is often defined as a self-implicating interdisciplinary science. Turning to the self-implicating nature of the study of Christian spirituality, J. August Higgins reminds us that the researcher's own experience of the spiritual life will dictate to some degree how one interprets the spiritual experience in question. Mary Rowling stresses that theologizing implicates one's whole being, inviting us to be authentic theologians. This is like Michael O'Sullivan's discussion on authentic subjectivity, As Christian scholars of spirituality, we need to transition from personal self-presence to an institutional or collective self-presence in our study of spirituality. The study of spirituality should not be limited to personal reflection, but if it is to be truly evangelical, it should lead to social engagement. For this reason, I invite Christian spirituality studies to be self-implicating, interdisciplinary, and especially socio-implicating. Christian spirituality study is interdisciplinary. It must integrate insights from theology, anthropology, psychology, history, and various other disciplines. Carol McDonough suggests using ethnography to assist us because it works towards revealing new understandings of complex phenomena from a cultural perspective. Denise Goodwin explains how qualitative studies in the field of spirituality can utilize social science design elements in coherence with the theological method of mutual critical correlation. Past and present spiritual traditions should be analyzed through social studies and historical methods to get at the socio-implication of Christian tradition. The works of several scholars in the book reminds me of C. Vanessa White's work on storytelling as an African-American spiritual practice, as well as Latino theologian Orlando Espin's explanation of traditioning, transformation, and traditioning. Spirituality is dynamic, and as such, tradition is a verb. It is constantly shaped by each generation. Research in spirituality should not just inform the scholar, but needs to form and transform individuals and communities. In her research, Debbie Armenta explores the wisdom of early Christians as they formed intentional communities to live their lives in totality for God and for the sake of the world. She does so because these writings can be applied to rethink formation in our 21st century. In her work, she used my socio-spiritual method. In 1983, I was sharing with mi amigo Felix what I was learning at school here at CTU. He interrupted my cotidiano when he asked me if all my study in theology was making the world a better place by simply asking, ¿Y qué? Inspired by the Felix question, so what? ¿Y qué? I challenge and invite spiritologians and scholars of spiritual theology to make their research socially meaningful. John Dubuque affirms that for those baptized in Christ, mission is not a duty, but an extension of pleasure, which does not turn in on itself, but brings empowerment and involves action. I completely agree. Any study of Christian spirituality needs to combine self-implication, socio-implication, and interdisciplinary research to retrieve and reinterpret spiritual classics for Christ's mission in today's world. In conclusion, the two sister sciences can work together as a theological study of Christian spirituality that is transformative, deeply engaged with tradition, and socially relevant. Scholars and theologians in these fields should be contemplatives in action, bringing the past and the present to guide, bridging the past and the present to guide and to form future generations in faith and in justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilberto.
Thank you, Rossano y Gilberto, for your prepared remarks. Dr. Vanessa White will now introduce the contributors who are present with us today.
Rossano and Gilberto were part of the four-person International Society for the Study of Christian Spirituality Committee that organized the 2019 conference. In 2019, that led to our book. The other two team members are also here with us today. They are Dr. Diana Villegas, who is an independent scholar living currently in Colombia. Her selected Letters of Catherine of Siena translation is coming out soon in the Classics of Western Spirituality by Paulus Press. Dinah was also a member of the International SSCS committee that organized the Evolving Methodologies Conference in 2019, which I was so happy to be a part of. Dr. Bernadette Flanagan is the leader of the Spirituality in Society and the Professions Research Group at the Southeast Technological University in Ireland. Bernadette was president of the SSCS and part of the International SSCS committee that organized the Evolving Methodologies Conference in 2019. The Evolving Methodologies book, right here, if you don't have your copy, please get it soon, is a collection of essays by 32 different scholars of spiritual theology, or the theological study of spirituality. Some of those scholars are with us here today, and they are Professor August Higgins, who is Assistant Professor of Christian Spirituality at the Oblate School of Theology in San Antonio, Texas. Professor Christo Lombard, who is head of the Department of Practical Theology and Mission Studies at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. Reverend Dr. Michael O'Sullivan, S.J., who is the founding director of the Spirituality Institute for Research and Education in Ireland, immediate past president of the Society for the Study of Christian Spirituality and research fellow at the University of the Free State in South Africa. Harold Madano, then a postgraduate student, still associated with St. Athanasius Coptic College, University of Divinity in Australia. She presented a phenomenology methodology in listening for ways of hidden prayer in the present. Dr. Denise Goodwin, who is a senior lecturer in the Department of Pastoral and Spiritual Studies at Catholic Theological College, Melbourne, Australia, and a recipient of the Medal of the Order of Australia. Reverend Dr. John DePuc is a senior lecturer at the Catholic Theological College within the College of Divinity in Melbourne, Australia. And Friar Dr. David Volger, who is professor of biblical theology at the Pontifical University Antonium in Rome. And so now we begin with questions, comments, or reflections regarding presentations, methodology, or the book. So if you have a question, comment, we will put it in the chat, or please raise your hand either on Zoom or on site so that we can respond. Laura, Dr. Lori.
Well, thank you for this magnum opus on spirituality and method. Excuse me. I think it's brilliant. And as a person who loves the historical critical method and values method in general, I think you've put together quite a diverse perspective on the topic of spirituality. And I was looking over the index, which is mammoth. But the question that occurred to me is, I absolutely agree with the trajectory of Christian spirituality. But back to the so what question. When we think about where we are today in the world, what do we do with post-Christian spirituality? And how does the work that you're engaged in, how can we open it up to others who, quite frankly, don't see the same value in Christian spirituality? So a question about post-Christian spirituality. I address it to Gilberto.
Who throws it out to the audience? I have not gone post yet.
Thank you, God.
And I have to be very honest, I do very little work with post-Christianity. I know it's out there, and I can smell it.
Yeah.
But I think some of my esteemed colleagues might actually have a better grasp of that.
Can I put my hand?
Sure.
Yes, please do.
Michael O'Sullivan speaking. Yeah, just to say that the presidential address I gave in San Diego there in last November, which will be published in the April issue of Spiritus, looks at this question somewhat because I was coming from a context where we can't take Christian spirituality for granted among a lot of the people we're addressing and engaging with and so on. So I tried to take an approach there that shows how you can actually approach people who are not in the Christian spirituality camp necessarily or completely, and see how to proceed from there. So if you read the Spiritus April spring issue coming out in April, maybe there's something there that would be helpful. I could say more, but I don't want to be talking too long.
We have a question or a comment from Bernadette Flanagan. Bernadette, if you could unmute, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm coming in from Dublin, Ireland as well. Delighted to be here. And I see in the comments the question around first, second, and third person. So maybe that's something I just quickly respond to. And it interacts with the whole issue of having methods which are able to engage students from diverse perspectives. So in Ireland, it's MA and PhD students in the study of spirituality in a technological university. So people can have any kind of background studying spirituality. But these first, second, and third person methods, where the first person is the person very much starts, uses methods which gives of contemplative practice, like Lexio as a research method, which gives them access to their own contemplative experience and helps them to articulate that. Second person practice is practice with one other person, maybe, or a group in something like action research, where people together are trying to discern contemplative movements of the spirit. And the third person then is more an observational method, where one is standing outside what is occurring in terms of contemplative practice or movements like pilgrimage or whatever it might be. So these methods enable people from diverse places to at least begin to take a step into the study of spirituality, and through the immersion in the experience, perhaps they find themselves looking at their own perspectives and their own positionality, and it enables them to take another step on the journey. So the practice of spirituality and research in spirituality aren't separate. But recently, in a staff seminar that we had of all the supervisors of the research, the fourth person perspective was raised, which is this reality of living at this time of global climate crisis. And how do we give attentiveness to what nature and this crisis is saying to us as a fourth dimension of reality? So even since the conference in Rome, it would seem that the methodologies are evolving. And so I'm delighted to hear Rossano is intending to give us space or to create an opportunity to look at the more recent evolutions, particularly, I suppose, in terms of the climate situation.
I see John DePuc, and then I see Diana Villegas. So John first, and then Diana.
Yes, thank you very much. Very good question indeed that's being asked here and discussed. And I think there's an inherent danger in being too focused on Christian spirituality because we can become self-reflective. I have many non-Christian friends who are very spiritual people, to use that term, and I can never speak to them about Christian spirituality or Christian doctrine or anything like that. They enjoy my company, I like to say, but the question comes always of perceiving the spirit in them. So a question of discernment. And I think the Christian spirituality that we're discussing here needs to be brought hand in hand with those who have no sense of Christian spirituality. That is, the education that comes from Christian spirituality enables me to look elsewhere and to discover the movement of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, in the character, in the search, the thirst of other people. So I think we need to be able to perceive the new, the unexpected, the strange, the work of God's hand in other people, and to perceive that and to welcome it and to affirm it, without at any stage really speaking about Christian spirituality or Christian doctrine. So I wanted to make that point, that I think we need to be both outward looking as well as inward looking. just a few comments there, but I think an extremely good question was being raised and discussed. Thank you.
Diana.
Yes, I wanted to say that I think based on our Christian tradition and in dialogue with studies about religion and what is it that identifies a religion, one can begin to identify what's an authentic unfolding of the human person. What's authentic unfolding, what's authentic growth that is perhaps separated from the particular beliefs involved. So, you know, John Dupuche, and sorry, John, I don't know how you pronounce your last name, whether it's the more French or more English or how, but so, you know, as he was saying, all of us probably know people who are on journeys of growth, where people are focused on how do I grow? How do I unfold? How do I deal with the transcendent? And how do I move towards my transcendent capacity? And perhaps people are not identifying it in that language, but perhaps from our experience as scholars of spirituality, we can identify that language of transformation, of moving towards the transcendent capacity of human persons, and identify all that in language that doesn't immediately refer to our beliefs. We can then sort of separately say, and these are our beliefs as Christians, and this is how my belief intersects with my particular journey as a Christian. But perhaps, you know, and I think that offers a place of dialogue for people who are journeying, seeking, but do not have a particular tradition of beliefs, but rather are again, on that human path of seeking to grow, seeking to move beyond themselves, seeking to be on a transcendent path.
Thank you, Diana. We also have Cristo Lombard, who was one of the contributors.
Thank you. On the question of post-Christianity, if by that is meant individuals, groups, or society that used to be Christian, but are no longer, I hold something of an alternative view. It is not the confessional view, it is a phenomenological view. Namely that post-Christianity for such individuals, groups, and societies does not exist. People may identify themselves as, to use such language, as being no longer Christian or post-Christian or beyond Christianity, no longer affected by it, but it is simply not true. They may not be practicing Christian liturgies in personal life or public life, but they certainly are drenched in Christian thought, in Christian morals, in Christian language, in very few aspects of life are unrelated to Christianity, even if they themselves do not see it. Let me give an example. I travel to the Czech Republic and to Estonia quite often to visit colleagues there. The two places in Europe, the two countries in Europe that are regarded as the most, not only a-religious, but anti-religious, slightly, publicly speaking. Yet, these are the two countries where I hear the most about Jesus. Not as a term of praise or endearment or something, but as a swear word. And as somebody already wrote a century ago, that nobody of us swears Zeus if we are angry or happy or in moments of ecstasy or despair. None of us do that. There's no emotional recognition of the term Zeus. Yet, if the language of Christianity is used as the reflexive expressions of these heartfelt emotions or experiences, then there's something. As it happens in both those two countries as well, both in journalism and in academic reviews, it has been found independently by the authors that these are the two countries that do Christmas markets the best. where is the post-Christianity? It is simply a different form of expression, or a different expression of Christianity. When I point this out to my Czech colleagues and my Estonian colleagues, especially or friends who are atheists, they say, no, it's just culture. It's simply culture. I don't mean anything by it. And that's precisely the point of post-secularism, or better stated, religious realism. You don't have to experience your expression of religion as expression of religion. It is. If you go to swear words or you go to festivals in December, are these high expressions of Christianity. You may recognize it as simply culture, but it is not simply culture. It is culture. Your culture is so drenched in religion that you can no longer escape from it. You are part of it. I don't mean escape negatively. You are part of it. You're drenched in it. This is simply Christian spirituality by other means.
Thank you, Christopher. Any responses or questions from those who are on site at this point? We'd like to make sure you are engaged in the conversation. Tony.
Just a quick clarification. So, in those countries, is Zeus or used as a curse word? In the way that hostia is shouted in Spain as a curse word?
No. That was not my point.
You're asking Christo? You're asking Christo the question? Yes.
You said they weren't.
He said, no, there.
Oh,
It isn't.
so it's how is
Are you-
Jesus used in Czechia and in Estonia?
I use the Zeus example simply as an example of that nobody swears like that. There's no emotional recognition. Therefore, if people do use words, the central terms of Christianity, Jesus, Holy Spirit, God, and related terminology, as expressions of ecstasy, happiness, despair, swear words, etc.
Okay.
Then it is simply part of their culture. They are religious. They may not recognize it, but they simply are religious.
Well, I do have a question for those who are contributors. Why is this book needed at this time? Looking at today's context, looking at what is taking place in our schools of theology, in our universities, why is this book, this collection needed at this time? Or is it? And I ask and I have John, I also have Michael,
Yes.
so. Speaking.
Good, thank you. My name is pronounced Dupuche. It's a French name.
Thank you.
If some people were asking, so Dupuche. Now, I think in response to that question, there's an immense thirst in Australia, but it's around the world, for spirituality. The growth in meditation practice is quite remarkable. And this, I think, is an indication that people want something more than the materialism that is so dominant in our present age. And the question then comes about how to provide people with a very clear and effective path to spiritual practice. And I think that's the value of this particular book on methodology. It shows the methods. Rather than the doctrine, strictly speaking, on a theological sense, which is always valuable, of course, it is showing different paths. And that is why I think this particular volume is absolutely essential and extremely valuable. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael?
Yes, Vanessa, I would say that a very important reason for the book is that initially, spirituality was kind of conceived under theology as some kind of a sub-discipline of theology, but there's a great need now to recognize that spirituality is a discipline in its own right that's not necessarily governed by theology. Theology is one discipline that contributes to it, as do other disciplines. They have been mentioned, the social sciences and so on. And I think it's trying to establish spirituality with greater autonomy is one of the reasons. And then we have to see, how do we study such a discipline in a way that doesn't come across as being absolutely, theologically led all the time, or subordinate to theology, and therefore, implicating a Christian worldview necessarily all the time into it. Because there are so many seekers who wish to say that they are spiritual, and they are, but wish to kind of have their journey and their search recognized in a way that's not so theologically shaped and formed, and that can allow for the fact that one can be spiritual without necessarily having to say, I'm also theological, which is not to say that theology doesn't matter, it does, but we have to recognize that it has to take its place in a way that doesn't try to dominate or take over, which I think in the past is how a lot of people have experienced it. And now they want to say, look, I want to have my spirituality respected, acknowledged for what it is, but not necessarily being taken over by theology. And this book, I think, is trying to show there are different ways of coming at this discipline that try to acknowledge some of these realities in our present day world.
Thank you, Michael. And I would pose that question to my colleague, Gilberto, who teaches our methods course here, and then move it on to if there was anyone outside. Gilberto, why?
Question in the chat.
Oh, and we also have a question in the chat, so I will get to that question.
Okay. Well, let me just bring these two together.
Okay, that sounds good.
For those of you who are not reading the board, the question is, if spirituality is to be socio-implicating, how do we move the dialogue from spirituality as an individual experience to an understanding of spirituality as communal experience for communal transformation? Amen. I've been, when you asked the question about post-Christian, I'm an introverted thinker, so it takes me a while, and I need to hear other voices in order to finally begin to percolate an answer. So I will try to answer all three in one. I found that as a Latino theologian, enlace is crucial. Enlace is to bring together, to tie together. And we try to do our theology en conjunto by enlazando the ideas that we hear, by tying them together. I kept thinking, as a good prior minor, recently we celebrated the first or the proto-martyrs of the order that went and got themselves killed in Morocco. And somebody, one of the friars, throws out a bomb on Facebook. You realize St. Francis did not want them canonized. And I thought, actually that makes sense. Because after they went and got themselves killed by pronouncing Jesus in the marketplace, Francis writes in his rule, when we go amongst the Saracens or unbelievers or not Christians, just live. If they ask you why you live that way, then share the gospel. And if they don't, shut up. So basically, Francis was already dealing with a post-Christian mindset. And he basically said, live your life, live your spirituality. Spirituality, the word, is about 100 years old in English. In Latin, about 1,500 years old. And it was coined as a way of saying, now that we are baptized, this is what we live. We live spirituality. If all theology was about spirituality and spiritual practice. And I would say to Bishop Faustus, who coined the word spirituality, yes, it is for all of the baptized, not just the mystics, not just the religious, maybe a diocesan priest or two. Sorry, I had to do that. Spirituality is about being human. To be human is to be physical. To be human is to be spiritual as well, because we have spirit. And so we can live a post-Christian spirituality, although we're still using Christianity to define ourselves. Or we can live an atheistic spirituality, but we're still using atheism to define ourselves. And I think that the socio-spiritual implications is that the speakers are right, those who have answered so far, that I have no problem being Christian, but I have no problem being human either. And there is a human spirituality. There are all sorts of spiritualities out there that we can recognize and we can appreciate as ways of transcending ourselves. And we can do that preferably, in my mindset, being, maybe because I'm a Latino, as a group. It's better to be sociocentric than to be egocentric in whatever spirituality we live. So I don't know if that answers your question, but hey.
Couple more.
There's a couple more in the chat, and then I'll get back to Chioma after I. Are they Jean-Pierre Ruiz? Aren't the interruptions of the routine part and partial of lo cotidiano in the spiritual life? What about the implications of the pandemic, for example?
All right. I thought about the pandemic and I threw it in there by saying global event. Okay. I snuck it in. We would love for the cotidiano to just, the routine to just keep going and we're fine. But we grow when we get interrupted. I thought, the first real interruption to my cotidiano was Felix, in many ways, but especially when he said, Ike, so what? I have been dealing with that question since 1985. And I hope to deal with it till the day I die. The pandemic was obviously a social interruption to the world's cotidiano. Just like I have a cotidiano, our societies have a cotidiano. The world has a cotidiano. And the pandemic certainly interrupted that greatly. And I think we're still dealing with it. And it's going to take some time.
Chioma?
Yeah, just because this is a spirituality conversation we're having. And Vanessa, when you asked your question, why this book, I began to think about some issues going on back home in Nigeria. Some weeks ago, one of the governors just said, his state is a Christian state. And that erupted many youths, so to say, that are now going back to the practice of African traditional religion. And we could see the physical fight, not physical, the fight on social media saying, no, you cannot pronounce a state a Christian state because you do not own the state. So to say, we own the state. And so, your question, I guess more emphasis on spirituality, reading on spirituality, the methodology and geographical location of places can really answer that question of spirituality. I don't see which one is better than the other, but better understanding of spirituality and how individuals or, lo cotidiano understands it helps to really identify an individual or a community or a group, So I think maybe that, I hope some of that is resolved in this book, given what you said, Gilberto, when you started, it seems like the authors are from all parts of the world. So I am expecting that, some of the issues going around the world is, discussed in the book.
The authors of the book represent every single continent. You've got all of America, Africa, Asia, Oceania, and that other one. Oh, Europe. And Europe. Sorry. Sorry, Europeans. The only ones not represented were the penguins.
We have
Do we have another
Good
question?
panel.
Carol McDonald, and then Bernadette Flanagan. So we have Carol, we have Bernadette, and we have Erlinda. So Carol,
Thank you. I would like to pick up the so what question, which has been asked over and over. It is what drew me to the conference. It was on the homepage of the conference, and I still think it is the critical question of the conference. And for example, Jean-Pierre asking, what about the implications of the pandemic, for example? Just consider, we were in Rome only weeks before Italy got cut into an east-west line across the country because of the pandemic north and not yet defined as south. Only days before the conference, I came back from south of France through Milano, and it still floors me, is that a word I can use? Still surprises me that, as far as we know, all of us who are at the Antonianum were not carrying the pandemic. We could have been. Some of us might have got sick from it. It was that close. And when I looked at the so what question, I was amazed that a friend here told me about an international conference of virologists who said in July of 2019, the world is primed for a world pandemic. And as Gilberto has just said, we're still dealing with it. But are we also dealing with that line across Italy and the world about pandemic, about all the other big questions that we have been, and this is so what, we have been facing in even more stark terms since 2019. The movement of human peoples, forced and chosen. The issues of safe water, safe housing, safe food, the basics of human survival. What is spirituality saying about that? Right now, this moment, I'm sitting in the bottom right-hand corner of the big island of Australia. Over the last week, we have had as much land burnt in fire as Los Angeles. We haven't had the people and the houses burnt, but we have had all the animals burnt, the ecosystems burnt, the farms burnt. And in one of the things I read only last night, so much water has been taken out of the dams, will we be able to keep fighting the fires? To me, these are the big questions of what our methodology is about. First, second, third, and I like fourth, Bernadette, what the socio implications that enable us to live together as 8 billion human beings with another trillion species. We don't know how many species that enable us to live in transformation as, and the questions of Christian, post-Christian, all the rest of it, that is really important. So I'll finish with, it's the year of the snake now for the Chinese people. And I suspect millions of snakes have been killed in Australia in the last few days. How do we stay alive?
thank you. Thank you, Carol. Bernadette, and then on Zoom, there's Erlinda. So we'll go, Bernadette. Flanagan, would you like to expand on your comment or question on demand on spirituality?
I was just responding to Christina Saker's question there. So just to leave something in the conversation, that the whole area of indigenous spiritualities, which we didn't attend to very much at the conference, is an area that may enrich that conversation about the communal aspects, just as we were having there with Carl as well, and the spiritualities that are developing within the domain of sustainability, where sustainability is moving away from just an outward focus into the inner focus, the inner development, the inner resilience, the inner cultivation of awareness and attentiveness, which is necessary for sustainable development. So I think a shift is happening in the studies of spirituality, which are bringing it into this communal space.
Thank you, Bernadette. Arlinda, who's on Zoom.
Hi. My question is also very connected to what Bernadette mentioned on indigenous spirituality. I appreciate very much the chapters that were placed in here. It's very rich, and it's really guiding for us, especially students who are going to do our research. I felt the need to recognize that my question regarding the desire to focus also on indigenous spirituality is, how do we study spirituality in such a way we can recognize the authority of non-Christian spiritualities? Considering that Christianity came through a dominant colonization all over the world, how can Christian spirituality honor indigenous spirituality and other spiritualities as sources of life? In terms of, I'm coming from a bias of looking at Christian spirituality as one that supports the best and most life-giving in what is really human and authentic. What could be one or two things that we really need as students also and researchers to remember when we are studying and writing on Christian spirituality, but at the same time recognizing the richness of other spiritualities, especially indigenous spirituality?
Thank you, Erlinda. So you posed a question of what are two things that we need as students who are studying that are in some ways are non-negotiables that you need to be mindful of if you're studying spirituality. So anyone who would wish to answer that, any of our professors or instructors?
And I have for the rest of the semester. Anybody?
So any of our contributors who you would say is non-negotiable needs to be answered. John?
Thank you. I've been profoundly influenced by a branch of Indian thought and a lot of study in that area. And there's great depth of spirituality, to use that term, in the Hindu traditions, Buddhist traditions. That raises huge questions with regard to Christian spirituality. And I think we need to face the fact that many, many people today are moving into Hindu and Buddhist forms of spiritual life. And that raises massive questions and challenges for our Christian spirituality. And it follows along the same line as our previous speaker, Erin, who raised the question with regard to indigenous forms of spirituality. I think we have an immense task there. And part of the methodology then of spirituality is this whole question of interspirituality. So I think there's a massive issue there in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Anyone else? Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right. Just to say that in Ireland now, there is a bit of a move towards indigenous spirituality, precisely because of the disillusionment with the institutional church and so on. And this is a way that people are responding to that disillusionment, is by going back to their earlier forms of spirituality, like holy wells and so on, and pilgrimages and so forth to particular sites. They're recognizing these places as sacred spaces from their own culture and their own geography. So it is interesting that part of the turn to indigenous spirituality, at least in Ireland, is due to the disillusionment with the institutional church in recent years over such things as the abuse crisis, the way it was handled. And in Ireland, the Irish language was much more a spiritual language than the English language, and we had our own original language. For example, in Ireland, when we wanted to say hello to somebody, we would say Dia Gwit, which means literally, may God be with you. And the response would be Dia Gwit agus Pádraig, which was may God and St. Patrick be with you, and so on. So the language, you wouldn't just say hello, you would say it like that. And so the spirituality of the people came through in the very language they were using. And with the disappearance of that language, well, it's not totally disappeared by any means, but with the removal of a great deal of that language through colonization by the British in Ireland, there was an impact then there on the way in which people thought and felt naturally, even when they spoke. So there is a desire to retrieve our past, either at the indigenous level of going away from the institutional church to a more earlier form of being spiritual, or also through trying to recover the language, because it brings on a greater spiritual sensitivity and consciousness in the people when they use it.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. At this moment, I'd like to turn it back over to our Carmen Naco Fernandez, who has some closing Feminist Fourth remarks.
I'd like to thank all of you for joining this program today. We thank you from every part of the globe. A special thanks to Rossano y Gilberto for setting the table for today's rich conversation. Special gratitude goes to Peter Cunningham and Steve Millies from the Bernardin Center. From the Spirituality and Pastoral Ministry Department, gratitude to Vanessa White and Chrissy Zaker and Gilberto Cavazos, who are the spirituality faculty in that department. And to Gilberto, who also happens to be the program coordinator and the John Dunn SCOTUS chair. Thanks to Letitia Akins for her technology support. In these very troubled times, we sincerely wish each of you a hope that sustains, a peace that endures, and God's healing spirit para siempre. Blessings on you this day. Gilberto, you have announcements for your class?
Yes, and with your spirit. Oh, thank you everybody for being here. Rossano, I especially thank you for all the work that you did in the book. I tagged along, and but I so enjoyed working with you, and I hope to work with you otra vez en el futuro, Dios quiera. And there was another thing, as you were talking about the Irish, the Spanish is a very, very, very religious, spiritual language as well. So maybe it's not Christianity, it's the English that is conquering the world, that is taking away our Christian indigenous, because there is such a thing as Christian indigenous. But speaking of indigenous, I have a collective group of students that needs to continue this discussion. So I do want to thank everybody, otra vez, for being here. And for my students, I will see you in our virtual classroom in 15 minutes. I'll make it 18. Okay. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.